Imagine observing the architecture in an older part of a major city, perhaps Boston, Paris, or St. Petersburg. The buildings look centuries old, characterized by stone arches, iron railings, and tall windows, beautiful and ornate. However, closer inspection reveals peculiar architectural features that challenge conventional design expectations. The row of ground-level windows may not be positioned to look out into the street, but instead appears partially or even fully buried. Some of these windows are sealed with brick, while others terminate directly into the surrounding soil or sidewalk. Furthermore, you might observe a doorway or a short staircase that descends below the current street level, with the lower part of the door itself obscured or sealed due to the elevated soil grade. These details are not isolated to a single structure. Entire grand entranceways now sit below the street level and are no longer in use. In effect, what structurally appears to be the original ground floor now functions as a basement or subterranean level, with the building's second floor serving as the current street level entrance. At first, these features might be dismissed as an anomaly of local construction or unique approach to city planning, yet this pattern of subterranean architecture is observable in disparate locations across the globe. In Seattle, a section of the original downtown exists below the current street level, consisting of storefronts and sidewalks that were deliberately covered when the city raised its grade after the Great Fire of 1889. Similarly, Chicago underwent massive civil engineering projects in the 1850s, where blocks of buildings were physically lifted using screw jacks to install a sewer system, often resulting in previous ground floor levels appearing partially sunk relative to the new raised street level. In St. Petersburg, historically significant palaces and government buildings exhibit ornate, full-sized windows positioned completely below the exterior grade. This collection of anomalies, windows into dirt, sealed doors underground, and buried lower levels, forms the basis for the alternative historical idea known as the Mudflood Theory. The theory suggests that a global or near-global catastrophic event, possibly occurring as recently as the 17 or 1800s, buried significant portions of existing civilization in mud and soil. Most historians and scientists attribute these features to documented processes such as urban growth, subsidence, and deliberate civil engineering projects. However, proponents of the Mudflood theory find the consistency of buried windows in underground levels too prevalent to be entirely explained by conventional, localized events. They propose a broader narrative that we may have inherited rather than built significant parts of our cities, suggesting the remnants of an earlier forgotten civilization. Welcome to Arcane Station. I'm your host, Mike Porter. The Mudflood theory is among the more unconventional alternative history concepts currently in circulation. It differs from theories concerning ancient lost civilizations like Atlantis by focusing on a potentially global catastrophe within the relatively recent past, in the last few hundred years, suggesting that we may be living atop buried remains of this ancient civilization. At its core, the central claim is that a massive event, whether it was natural disaster or overwhelming flood of mud or any other type of cataclysm, occurred in the 17 or 1800s, covering substantial parts of major cities in soil. According to the theory, entire floors of buildings disappeared beneath the new surface, leading to the proposition that what we are currently labeling as basements may have originally been the ground floor of these ornate buildings. A key factor sustaining interest in this theory is that the purported evidence is not confined to restricted archives, but it's often visible in plain sight. In the older downtown areas of many major cities, one can observe windows located below the current sidewalk level, sealed doors that face into earth, or staircases that descend but no longer lead to an active entrance. For proponents, these anomalies are interpreted as the physical signatures of a catastrophe that has been intentionally or inadvertently omitted from official historical records. Mainstream historical and engineering perspectives offer practical, well-documented explanations for these phenomena. For instance, urban grade changes. Cities frequently raise their streets, sidewalks, and infrastructure on accumulated debris and past structures. Then there's geological subsidence. Ground built on soft soils can settle or compact, causing buildings to sink gradually. And then there's deliberate engineering. Specific recorded civic projects, such as city lifting efforts or post-disaster street elevation, account for many of these buried levels. While these conventional explanations are valid, mudflood proponents raise questions about the global consistency. Why do so many basements exhibit the finished detail and architectural style typically reserved for main floors? Why do these similar features appear across continents and diverse cultures in cities that supposedly developed independently? How do these features align with historical maps that reference a vast, powerful, yet now vanished civilization known as Tartaria? The mudflood theory often extends beyond architecture, connecting to broader assertions about hidden history, lost technological knowledge, and historical erasure. Some affiliated ideas suggest that 19th century disasters served as a cover story to eliminate evidence of an advanced earlier civilization. Other speculative connections link the story or the theory to ancient accounts of global floods or the concept of cyclical resets. This analysis will proceed by examining the various facets of the mudflood concept. In Section 1, I'm going to do a historical and cultural background, exploring the origins of the idea and its relationship of old maps depicting Tartaria. In Section 2, I'm going to look at modern evidence and accounts, focusing on specific documented architectural anomalies and their local explanations. In Section 3, I'll give a systematic review of both the conventional, which is, like geological or historical, and alternative explanations such as global disasters and cosmic events. And then in Section 4, I'm going to look at the highly speculative connections, including theories of free energy and concepts of interdimensional resets. And in the conclusion, I'm going to weigh what's plausible versus what is proven and have a discussion on why this is a persistent theory and why it maintains its appeal. The central issue is whether these visual realities represent localized documented urban development or are the result of a single massive and forgotten global event. The modern conceptualization of a world partially buried by mud is relatively recent development, primarily circulating in online communities. However, the underpinnings of the mudflood theory draw upon two older historical threads: maps referencing the territory of Tartaria and the frequent 18th and 19th century discovery of subterranean architecture. So a common element cited by the mudflood proponents is that the depiction of Tartaria or Tartary on maps produced by European cartographers from the 16th through the 19th centuries is one of these things that they can point to and say, this has been changed. The name was typically applied as a broad geographical umbrella term for the immense and often poorly understood regions of northern and central Asia, encompassing parts of Siberia, Mongolia, and Central Asia. Labels such as Great Tartary, Chinese Tartary, or Independent Tartary may appear on these documents. Historically, cartographers used Tartary as a vague placeholder for territories primarily populated by nomad groups, which were largely inaccessible to European documentation. As geographical data became more precise in the late 19th century, the term gradually disappeared from maps, replaced by specific political and geographical boundaries. For proponents of the mudflood theory, this disappearance is suspect. They argue that the term's consistent presence across centuries suggests Tartaria was a vast, actual empire with advanced technology and architecture. In this view, Tartaria was systematically destroyed by a mudflood or similar catastrophe in the 18th or 19th century, and its subsequent removal from modern maps is interpreted as part of a deliberate historical cover-up. Concurrently with the fading of Tartaria from maps, the phenomenon of buried or sunken buildings became impossible to ignore, particularly as cities across Europe and North America underwent rapid urban expansion. In the 18th and 19th centuries, observers noted streets where houses appeared sunken with doors and windows sitting below the existing level already. While such multi-layered construction was expected in ancient European cities like Rome, which had centuries of ruins beneath them, similar anomalies began to appear in seemingly newer cities, such as Boston and St. Petersburg. These locales were not supposed to possess deep architectural histories yet, often displayed buildings with entire levels below grade. Conventional explanations for this reoccurring pattern are well documented. City engineers raising streets to improve drainage, foundation settling in poor soil, or new development being constructed on top of old streets and accumulated rubble. However, the sight of finely decorated windows and arched entranceways facing into dirt raised questions among early observers. Why would builders construct what appeared to be a detailed first floor of a building only to bury it? In Russia, St. Petersburg was built rapidly on marshland in the early 1700s, and it quickly showed signs of sunken architecture by the 1800s, leading to folklore about the ground swallowing the city. Now, the specific term mudflood gained traction on the internet in the early 2000s and 2010. Online communities began systematically compiling photographs of buried windows, sealed doors, and sunken buildings from around the world. These collected visual anomalies were then synthesized with the older Tartaria maps and various theories about lost technology and historical reset event. Disasters in the 18th and 19th centuries, such as the Great Fires, earthquakes, and floods, are reinterpreted within this framework not as independent regional accidents, but as potential cover stories for a single global catastrophe that destroyed an advanced civilization, leaving modern society to rebuild upon its ruins. The theory thus becomes a means of questioning broader historical narratives. The mudflood concept also resonates with cultural memory, specifically the widespread existence of global flood myths. Nearly every major civilization possesses a story detailing a destructive deluge, which proponents view as evidence of a recurring catastrophic global pattern of resets in history. The historical background sets the stage. The documented disappearance of the cartographic term Tartaria and the consistent documented appearance of buried architecture in cities globally. The next step is to analyze the specific modern physical evidence that fuels the debate. The enduring appeal of the mudflood theory rests heavily on the physical evidence that is observable and documentable today. This section examines specific case studies to analyze the material evidence and the competing narratives concerning these submerged city layers. The first case study is Seattle's underground and the deliberate grade change. After the devastating Great Fire of 1889, which destroyed much of its downtown, Seattle city leaders intentionally decided to raise the street grade to resolve chronic flooding and sewage issues. Engineers constructed retaining walls and filled the spaces, elevating the new street level by as much as 12 to 30 feet. The abandoned original sidewalks and storefronts were either converted into basements or sealed off, forming what is now known as the Seattle Underground. So in a conventional view, this is a clear, well-documented case of deliberate civil engineering to solve a municipal crisis. For the mudflood proponent, they argue that photographic evidence suggests that before the 1889 fire and subsequent raising of the streets, some buildings already exhibited partially buried windows and entrances. This anomaly is used to suggest that the city may have been resting on a pre-existing hidden layer before the deliberate grade change. In the mid-1800s, Chicago, which was built on swampy ground, suffered from poor drainage. The solution involved a massive civil engineering feat. Beginning in 1885, engineers used thousands of screw jacks to physically lift entire blocks of multi-story brick buildings. This allowed for the installation of a proper sewer system and the creation of a new street level, sometimes up to 14 feet higher than the original. In the conventional view, historical photographs from the area depict buildings being lifted, and the subsequent grade change resulted from the original first floors effectively becoming submerged basements relative to the new raised street level. This is explained by recorded civic necessity. For the mudflood proponent, researchers argue that many of these newly designated basements possess tall ceilings, ornate arches, and decorative windows, features that contradict the function and utility typically associated with utility basements. This raises the question of whether Chicago was merely adapting to a swamp, or if it was inheriting architecture already partially buried by the previous event. St. Petersburg was founded in 1703 and was constructed rapidly on the marshland at the mouth of the Neva River. Today, many prominent buildings, including palaces and government offices, display rows of ornate windows below the current grade. Excavations have revealed finished, plastered rooms and molded detailing lying beneath the street level. So again, in conventional views, the official explanation is marshland subsidence. The poor foundations on swampy ground caused the buildings to settle unevenly over centuries, and accumulated soil and rubble compounded the issue. As a mudflood proponent, critics note the consistent pattern and the expensive stonework and tall decorative windows used in spaces that would be expected to sink and become hidden. That Tsar Peter the Great may have been repurposing structures already partially buried in the mud, rather than founding entirely new ones. Mexico City provides a documented example of a metropolis actively sinking. It was built on the soft clay lake bed of Lake Texcoco. The city compacts as the water is pumped from underground aquifers. Landmarks like the Metropolitan Cathedral visibly lean and sink, requiring decades of stabilization efforts. The city is measurably sinking by inches every year. And in the conventional view, this is an established, measurable case of geological subsidence caused by soil issues and aquifer depletion. From the mudflood perspective, while acknowledging subsidence, proponents emphasize that excavations consistently reveal multiple layers, including Aztec temples and colonial foundations, showing how easily entire levels of history can become physically stacked and vanish underground, providing a localized illustration of the broader mudflood concept. None of these direct accounts mention a mudflood by name, but they collectively document real events, deliberate grade changes, subsidence, and widespread soil deposits that are integrated by theorists as evidence supporting their global catastrophe hypothesis. My preceding analysis established that the architectural anomalies such as finished floors buried underground and decorative windows facing dirt are persistent and globally observable. Nearly every example also has a clear documented conventional explanation. This dichotomy requires an objective review of the competing narratives. This next section takes the localized explanations encountered in the city case studies and organizes them into systematic categories ranging from conventional engineering to catastrophic global events. We're going to weigh the coherence and evidence supporting each hypothesis for the existence of these buried urban features. The Mudflood theory is founded on genuinely anomalous architectural features as documented in Section 2. The core debate centers on the causation. Explanations for why these levels exist range widely from practical urban development to catastrophic planetary events. And the majority of these buried architectural features are accounted for by well-documented localized processes such as urban development. Cities are dynamic environments where the ground level often rises over time as infrastructure is built on accumulated debris and new pavement. These changes are frequently deliberate. For instance, cities have systematically raised streets to improve drainage and install sewer systems, often by filling in low-lying areas and physically elevating existing blocks of buildings. This results in original ground floors becoming basements relative to the new surface. The settling of soil over time could cause structures to sink, making lower levels appear buried. This is especially true for buildings constructed on marshland, drain lake beds, or river deltas. The sinking is often caused by the compaction of saturated soil or the depletion of underground water sources, causing gradual, measurable settlement over decades. These are established concepts of geotechnical engineering. In older metropolises, new construction naturally builds atop the ruins and rubbles of the old, a process archaeologists refer to as stratigraphy. Following major fires, sieges, or earthquakes, cities frequently did not remove all debris. They simply leveled the site and built the new street level higher, sometimes burying the first story of a surviving structure. The presence of underground levels is therefore the anticipated result of a millennia of urban continuity and disaster. If conventional localized explanations are deemed insufficient, the next level of theory involves sudden, large-scale natural disasters that could globally deposit soil. History contains examples of towns being rapidly buried by earth and mud. Liquefaction, triggered by massive earthquakes, causes water-saturated soil to behave like quicksand, capable of rapidly sinking buildings into the ground. A series of massive recent global earthquakes could conceivably cause widespread partial sinking. So there's also landslides and mudflows, or lahars, typically associated with volcanoes or steep terrain. It demonstrates that sudden, localized burial by overwhelming flows of mud and earth is possible. And then there's also atmospheric and volcanic events. The atmosphere can transport vast amounts of material that deposit on the ground, creating a layer of residue that can contribute to the grade change. Mud rains occur when strong winds carry dust great distances, and they mix with rain, and they leave a thick layer of mud and dust upon landing. Historical records from the 19th and 20th centuries note such phenomena, which would be perceived as a catastrophe by contemporaries if the deposits were widespread. And then there's volcanic eruptions such as Mount Tambora in 1815, and it demonstrates that a single event can eject enough ash into the atmosphere to cause global climate disruption. Proponents speculate that other unrecorded eruptions could have deposited widespread layers of silt and mud globally. These hypotheses move beyond conventional science and documented evidence. In my next section, it's going to be talking about highly speculative theories. And these hypotheses move beyond conventional science and documented events, connecting the buried architecture to broader conspiracy narratives. Some theorists propose a non-geological origin for the mud layer. This includes theories such as cometary impact, which could cause massive atmospheric dust clouds, tsunamis, and widespread mud deposits. Other ideas involve global destabilization triggered by extreme magnetic or solar events that could somehow cause the Earth's crust or accumulated surface layers to shift or deposit. And then there's the reset hypothesis. This concept suggests that the mudflood was not merely a disaster, but an engineered deliberate erasure of history. Disasters of the 19th century, like fires and quakes, are reinterpreted as planned cover-ups to destroy evidence of older, suspicious architecture. The uniform appearance of neoclassical architecture across different continents is cited as evidence of an inherited civilization, not independent development. And the fact that there is this disappearance of Tartaria from maps is taken as a confirmation that an entire empire was systematically removed from memory. In this view, the mudflood was a reset used to wipe the slate clean and rewrite the historical timeline. The existence of buried architectural features is an established fact. However, the evidence is capable of supporting multiple, highly divergent narratives, ranging from prosaic civic planning to catastrophic cosmic impacts. This ambiguity is the primary reason the mudflood theory persists. In my previous sections, I talked about the established visual evidence of buried architecture and the historical context of Tartaria. And then in the next section, I talked about systematically reviewing the competing narratives, moving from documented engineering projects to highly speculative global disaster scenarios. While many aspects of the mudflood theory can be explained through conventional history and earth science, the theory gains much of its cultural traction from its connection to other seemingly unconventional claims. These are related to ideas that historical anomalies like buried buildings, global flood myths, and neoclassical architecture uniformity are not separate curiosities but part of a single suppressed historical narrative. In this final analytical section, we will explore these more highly speculative connections. We're going to review how the mudflood proponents link their architectural observations to concepts of lost free energy technology, and how the theory plays into the widespread cultural archetype of a great historical reset. As stated, a frequent theme associated with the mudflood theory is the concept of a lost advanced technology possessed by the alleged civilization of Tartaria. Proponents argue that the grand neoclassical and Baroque structures seen worldwide were not merely decorative. Instead, they are claimed to have been sophisticated machines used to harness a form of free energy, often referred to as atmospheric or etheric electricity. Specific architectural elements are reinterpreted as technological components. Domes and spires are claimed to have functioned as antennae or receivers, while copper roofs and metal railings are viewed as conductors. In this view, the mudflood event was the catastrophic mechanism that destroyed this globally networked energy infrastructure, rendering the functional buildings into ruins. The event then becomes a conventional way to describe the world from a free energy economy to one reliant on oil and coal. A key piece of visual evidence cited for the historical reset concept involves the World's Fairs of the late 19th and 20th centuries. There's the grandeur anomaly. The fairs often featured immense, elaborate, neoclassical structures made of marble-like plaster known as staff. These buildings possess the very architectural features that mudflood researchers claim belong to the lost civilization of Tartaria. There's a demolition claim here as well. Official records state that many of these vast and beautiful structures were intended to be temporary and were subsequently torn down shortly after the fair closed. Proponents find this official history suspicious, arguing that the buildings were far too grand, too well built, and too numerous to have been constructed so quickly, only to be destroyed. There's an alternative interpretation. The theory says that these fairgrounds were, in fact, already existing, partially buried cities left over from the mudflood. The World's Fairs were allegedly used as a convenient narrative cover to occupy, clean up, and eventually dismantle or repurpose the advanced infrastructure inherited from the former civilization before the modern world could properly document its origins. Ultimately, the mudflood theory taps into a powerful and widespread cultural archetype, the historical reset. This idea suggests that humanity does not progress linearly, but moves through cycles of advanced civilization followed by a catastrophe and then a return to a primitive state. The theory utilizes the consistency of global flood myths, Noah, Gilgamesh, as evidence, but places the destructive event in the relatively recent past of the 17 to 1800s. This provides a compelling explanation for the many architectural and historical anomalies that defy easy categorization. It suggests that our current understanding of history is not just incomplete, but fundamentally wrong, providing a sense of discovery and mystery that official measured accounts often lack. The evidence for lost free energy or a planned global reset is currently based on reinterpretation and selective visual data, rather than empirical proof or confirmed historical documentation. However, these compelling, highly speculative connections are what drive the public interest in the mudflood theory as a unified, comprehensive explanation for historical and architectural incongruities. So we've moved through the documented architectural anomalies, the historical context of Tartaria, the well-established conventional explanations, and the speculative claims. The core of the matter remains. The physical evidence of buried finished architecture is indisputable. The question is how to interpret this evidence. Does the recurring pattern demand a single explanation, like a global catastrophe, or do conventional localized explanations suffice? In this final section, we'll conclude by weighing the plausibility of the Mudflood theory against the established historical and scientific consensus. We're going to assess the theory's cultural appeal and offer a framework for skeptical but open-minded consideration of the enduring mystery of these submerged city layers. So the Mudflood theory presents a compelling alternative narrative that challenges conventional history by pointing to physical evidence observable in nearly every major older city. When you analyze this through a rigorous skeptical lens, supporting a single global mudflood event in the 18th or 19th century is significantly lacking. The vast majority of buried architecture can be attributed to documented processes, deliberate grade changes, subsidence in geology, and historical layering. These localized events, when aggregated globally, account for the widespread pattern. There's also a lack of supporting catastrophic evidence. A global catastrophic mud depositing event in the 17 or 1800s would have left overwhelming uniform geological and paleontological evidence. It would have massive uniform mud strata globally. No such uniform evidence has been discovered or accepted by the scientific community. And the term Tartaria on old maps is consistently interpreted by historians as a generalized geographical term, not a unified, technologically advanced global empire that vanished suddenly. Despite strong conventional counter-arguments to the Mudflood theory, it still persists because it proves a unified, emotionally compelling answer to multiple isolated anomalies. It offers a powerful counter-narrative to the mundane explanations of urban development. The theory reintroduces mystery and grandeur into history. It replaces the slow, bureaucratic processes of sewage installation and street grading with the dramatic spectacle of a forgotten global civilization. Furthermore, the idea of a recent historical reset taps into a deep cultural archetype, suggesting that our current historical understanding is not just incomplete, but fundamentally wrong, empowering the individual to discover a hidden truth. The uncomfortable possibility remains that even if not a single global event happened, the sheer scale of the historical processes, massive grade changes, simultaneous subsidence across continents, and documented instances of building elevation changes may have created the appearance of a global catastrophe. This forces us to confront how easily history can become physically buried by even conventional means. The ornate windows buried in dirt, the bricked-over doors, and the underground halls are not just oddities of construction. They are tangible scars of historical change. Whether those scars were left by a localized engineering event, natural geological forces, or a grand forgotten event remains the central point of contention. The next time you walk through an old part of your city, look carefully. Notice the half-buried windows at street level. You might be surprised by what you notice and how easy it is to misinterpret what you're seeing. So that concludes our in-depth skeptical journey into the strange and unsettling architectural evidence that informs the foundation of the Mudflood theory. We've scrutinized the genuine anomalies of buried architecture, assessed the historical context of Tartaria, and weighed the competing narratives of documented urban engineering against theories of a global reset. While conventional history and geology offer compelling evidence-based explanations for nearly every observed anomaly, the collective visual pattern continues to raise challenging questions about the completeness of our historical understanding. The mystery of those ornate windows facing into the earth persists. It's a constant, tangible reminder that history is always being layered, sometimes by deliberate human effort, sometimes by the slow geological processes, and perhaps, as the theory suggests, by forces we have yet to fully document. Take a look at our news section on arcanestation.com and you'll see the pictures that have sparked the idea of a purposeful destruction of history. If you've spotted strange architecture in your own city, a staircase leading nowhere, a window below grade, or a seemingly out-of-place basement, we'd welcome your objective observations. You can share your accounts and findings with us at mike@arcane-station.com, or you can join the conversation on our soon-to-be-released Discord community forum. Thank you for listening. If you found this examination thought-provoking, please subscribe, leave a review, and share Arcane Station with a friend who enjoys pulling on those loose threads of history. I'm your host, Mike Porter, and we'll see you next time.